Okay, so I'd like to call the regular meeting of the City Council and Board of Education Ad Hoc Committee to order. It is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. It is 6:34 p.m. And in attendance, I have myself, Joe DeLucia, the chair, Stacy Gould, Norwich City Council Vice Chair. I do not see Mark Betancourt yet. I see Heather Romansky, BOE Chair. I see Tricia Staley. I see Singh Khalsa. I see Carlene Sharmalis. I see Christine DeStasio. I do not see Dr. Jack Caruso. I also see in attendance John Salamone, the city manager, Josh Pothier, the comptroller, Bob Serpensky, the business manager for Norwich Public Schools, Tamara Gloucester, assistant superintendent, Norwich Public Schools. And am I missing anybody?
Yeah, Jamie Bender.
Oh, and Jamie Bender, yes, I did write your name down. I just wrote it down on a different piece of paper. And Jamie Bender, who is the Director of Student Services. Perfect, okay. All in attendance. And we do have a quorum present. Before I go any further on the agenda, you'll notice that I do not have an agenda item for the adoption of minutes. I just sent an email maybe 15 minutes ago. Okay, that was an oversight. However, I also realized that I had not sent out the draft minutes to the committee and I didn't realize that till about a half an hour ago. Yeah, in the email it says, and I'll say now, that at our next meeting, I will have tonight's draft minutes and the draft minutes from our meeting last month, and we'll adopt both of those at that time at that next meeting. Okay, and give everybody a chance to read through both sets of minutes. Okay, having said that, review of committee scope and purpose, just to say that our scope is to promote transparency, communication, and collaboration regarding the school budget. Our purpose is to make a recommendation to the City Council regarding the funding request from the Board of Education. And that takes care of item 2. Item 3, public comment. And are there any members of the public present tonight that would like to make a comment to the committee? I'll ask again, are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment to the committee? Third and final time, are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment to the committee? Hearing none, declare public comment closed. Item number 4, unfinished business. We have none. Moving on to new business. Item 5A, discussion and possible action on the city manager's proposed budget for the Board of Education. I would like to open the floor for any member of the committee that would like to begin the comment. Everybody's seen the city manager's proposed budget to the City Council. You're aware, and some of you participated in the budget hearing and heard the questions that we asked and the presentation that Dr. Stringfellow made. And I'd like to further and deepen that discussion, or at least provide the opportunity to further and deepen that discussion now. So the floor is open to anyone that would like to speak. Crickets. Bob Serpensky, go right ahead.
Yeah, I need to say a few things, and I guess maybe some of them aren't very pleasant, but I think they need to be said. I went to the City Council meeting in the presentation, and that was my first formal meeting, so I didn't really have to do too much. And Stacy Gould asked a question, and to me, it was a very reasonable question. And it was on the budget document that was passed out. And basically, to try and paraphrase, the tuition line item for the 2021 budget and the 21-22 budget were the same. And if I recall correctly, she asked if the budgeted number in the 21-22 budget would be sufficient to meet the needs. As a business manager, in normal circumstances, that would be a question I would answer in a heartbeat. So I figured I couldn't give the answer that night, but I'd go back to my office, and in a couple of days, I'd have an answer. I'd write up a nice analysis, and I'd send it out to Stacy, the Board of Education, and the City Council. Keep in mind, they had only been here a week. That's when I started to learn things, and I learned things every day, and I didn't like what I learned. I've worked on this, and amongst other things, trying to come up with the answer, and I couldn't. What I found is the budget process is very sorely lacking. And in order to build a budget, monitor the budget, report to the City Council, the Board of Education, and the superintendent, I have to make significant changes. I knew when I took the position that things needed to be fixed, but I had no idea that I'd be starting from scratch. There's a ton of work to do. I'm very grateful that Sandra Kutchguy is there, because she's amazing. And with her help, we'll get there. As far as that question on the budget number, I went back and looked at the City Council's, the presentation from the previous year. And the number for that initial budget presentation for tuition was $36,919,000. Then I looked at this year's number for the same year, 2021, and it's $35,814,126. And I went into Munis and looked what the actual budget is for this year, and it's $34,014,014. So I have three different numbers, and there is literally no documentation to say how we got to those numbers or what the audit trail was. So that's just an example of how things are, and it's like that throughout the entire budgeting process. So what I did do, spending time, was looking at what the 21-22 budget should be, and I've made it through all the regular education, all the magnet school tuitions, VOAG and things like that. I made it through some of the special eds, but I have a lot more to do. I've looked at year-to-date numbers for that, and if I compare where we might end the year with the 21-22 budget, I feel that we could be okay on the tuition line item, but I can't answer that with certainty. So I just wanted everyone to know that there's an awful lot of work that has to be done to make the financial management and reporting where it should be. I take personal ownership of the budget wherever I've been. I need to know it inside and out. I view it as my budget. So if someone asks me a question in the future, I need to be able to tell you why it's not right or what's wrong. I can't do that right now. So I'm gonna have to ask for some patience until we can build a system so that we can report the way it is.
Well, thank you for that. That lends a lot of clarity. I won't speak for Stacy, but we have had a number of conversations in this venue, right? About the not so much, it's not about the accuracy of the numbers as if they're inaccurate. It just seems like they're never finished, right, until June 30th hits. And I know that in some cases that's going to be true, right? You don't really know till you close out the books. But you know, when you're in a year in advance and you're trying to build an entire budget, you know, my expectation is that the numbers are going to be as accurate as possible. So I appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
I see that Stacy has her hand raised. I'll turn the floor over to her. Stacy, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So Bob, I just want to thank you for making those comments. As everyone knows, this has sort of been the bane of my existence, that I get a document, it's got a number. I say, and I ask a question, and then they say, oh, got another document, here's another number, here's another document, here's another number. And I know that you're coming in, hot in the middle of the budget season, and I'm not putting anything on you. It's not anybody's fault. And the system is going to get straightened out. I have no doubt by you. So I appreciate very much your comments that you made. We'll just work together moving forward to make this easy for everybody to understand.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think Dr. Stringfellow and Tamara and Sandy and everyone there is what they've put together to get the budget to this place without a business manager and without the proper system, I'm quite impressed with. And just sticking with your tuition question, Stacy, if I may, that's a big number. It's $35 million. And if I were presenting that to the budget, to the Board of Ed or to the City Council, that's okay to show that as an object number, but I would give you a breakdown on how much of that is tuition for your designated high schools, NFA versus the other 4 schools we send them to. We should have it identified by special ed at the designated high school. How much is the magnet school tuitions? How much is sped tuitions? And then a total of students that go with them. So it gives you a flavor of where your students are going and what the different components are. And I don't think it's acceptable to just say tuition is $35 million. But to get to that point, we have to do different ways of doing the budget than has been done in the past. And it just takes time to get those things in place.
And I'm a very patient person most of the time.
Well, I will work as
You're
fast as I
laughing.
can, and I just want, Sandy is amazing, and the people, Mary Ellen is amazing, and we have a lot of things to figure out, and we'll get there.
I'm sure, I have no doubt you will, Bob, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
And just one, well, actually 2 final notes real quick. I don't know how many of the Board of Ed members that were watching during the hearing. And I don't mean that in any kind of way. I just don't know how many were actually watching. I know Heather was in the room. Obviously, Kristen was there. Bob was in the room. I said at that hearing, and I'll say again now that of how much I appreciate the fact that in the current year that the board is living within the adopted budget from the council. And I said that, also said that night, and I made eye contact with Heather. I know, because we had this conversation, I know, and I appreciate, and I feel how hard that was to do, how many people that impacted in our district, and how that impacted those of you on the Board of Ed that had to work with the superintendent and central office to make that happen. So having said that, my second thing, and then I'll be quiet and yield the floor, but it's to what Bob just said about he was concerned. He started off being concerned about how candid he was going to be. I, for one, appreciate the candor. Let's talk about what's really going on, even if they're things that are hard to hear, so that we can talk about it and try to come up with solutions that make sense for the whole city, and make sense for the kids that we're trying to serve with the education budget. So you don't ever have to be concerned about being too candid with us. I would actually prefer it. Singh, you had your hand up next. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And thank you, Bob, for, pointing out all these details. And we all know there's plenty of work to do, but I am just glad, despite of all the odds, everybody's still trying to pull strings and making sure we get to the right track. My question actually is if there's any update, because I know the thing came up that, let's say if there's any surplus left in the existing budget, and will that can be used as a kind of rainy day funds for the Board of Education, or how that situation will be tackled, or Or do we have to return that money if, let's say, if anything is left, or we have, you know?
Yes, so that's actually going to be on that's our next agenda item, based on what the superintendent said, that small amount of money, well, relatively small amount of money could possibly be allocated for a small capital account specifically for the Board of Ed. Obviously, the council would have to take that up, but right now, that's kind of the train of thought. That's the conversation that's going on. We're going to talk about it a little bit tonight, I would imagine, in a few minutes, to get some input from this group. But that's where that's at right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Heather.
After I talk, then I'll figure out how to put my hand down. Joe, I appreciated your comments that night at the hearing. I think from my perspective, I have not served on the board a particularly long time, but I have been involved and, attended meetings before I joined. And I will say without a doubt that the June 2020 Board of Education meeting was the worst one I've ever had to participate in. So I appreciate the acknowledgement that that was difficult for us. I just want to say, I also appreciate Bob's transparency. And I think from my perspective, I'm not particularly surprised that is what he is working with. I think we have known that for some time on the board, and we have been working to try to resolve some of those issues, because we knew that was one of the biggest problem areas between the Board of Education budget and our budgeting process and the city council. Stacy's right. Our documents were confusing, and that's why you'll see in the past we've had a 100 and some page book that we've handed out with the history of every school, and that's really great and interesting stuff. And we have that in another place now. Like, we're focused on the numbers and focused on, one by one sort of getting the accurate, detailed, easy to understand information that you've all been asking for a long time. So I guess my last little plug here is that we have tried very hard as a board to, like you said, live within our means, and to do what's best for the students and the city, which sometimes is hard to balance, and that we really are making a very honest and I don't mean you're calling us dishonest, but we're working very hard to do the things you've asked of us, to stay within our budget and to figure out ways to cut costs and to create efficiencies in some of our systems. And we've had the support of Josh and the city manager, so I'm grateful for that as well. And from my perspective, we've made some small positive steps, and we have a lot more to make. But from where we were a year ago, we've moved in the right direction. We've not been backsliding. So thank you.
Thank you. So I see that Pro Tem Betancourt joined the meeting. Welcome. Long time no see. Right? We are on item 5A, Mark, where we're discussing the city manager's proposed budget for the Board of Ed. If you have any thoughts on that you would like to share, that would be fine. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, I think I'll be honest with you, and I think we talked about this, you and I, the other day a little bit. I mean, based on the superintendent's comments, it puts us in a kind of a difficult spot, I think, as a council. So I agree with her. There is one, I'll start with, I think it's farther on the agenda, but I agree with her concept regarding the creation of a non-lapsing fund, as Josh would refer to it, because it's something that they probably should establish, which would act as a capital fund for some of their projects. I think it makes sense. So we're not in this situation where, we're trying to figure out how to take care of various problems that they are going to crop up from time to time. So if they can save the money in their operating budget and roll that into a capital fund or a non-lapsing account, then I would be in favor of that. Obviously, we don't want to be padding the budget just to put money in that account, but obviously, if there's opportunities for savings and your operations are run well, and any budget has some contingency built into it here and there, you should. I think then that money should probably stay with the Board of Ed, so we can not have those big bites later. So rather than having to bond other monies or do whatever. So then as far as the budget itself goes, I think, I get where the superintendent's coming from as far as eliminating the reliance on grants. The problem is, and I think I said this at the budget hearings for education, this is I don't know if the city can afford it right now. So that's the issue, and we're going to try to find some balance there. So it may be you can have one and not the other, as far as either the non-lapsing fund or the reliance on grants, at least temporarily. So, but maybe we can, split the baby a little. I don't know. We'll see. I just don't know. There's never easy solutions with this, but we certainly have to, I think, have a better understanding of what the impacts of the grant reliance are. So I think we'd probably be best served to be concentrating on that issue, so that we can make a decision, that's based more in fact rather than, okay, this is just a cost. Thank you.
Thank you. So the reality of the situation is that the city manager's proposed budget and the Board of Ed's adopted budget are in the area of $2 million apart.
I thought it was 1.22.
Is it 1.22?
1.22.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
1.22
I transposed the
million.
numbers. I'm thinking 2.1. For some reason, I got 2.1 in my head, but
God,
no.
you're scaring me, Joe.
Yeah.
That
That's
made
right.
me a little,
It's adult onset dementia here or something. I don't know, maybe, but let's hope not anyway. But so 1.22 apart. Okay. And that's where we stand right now. If and again, I want to keep the floor open as much as possible. I mean, so that's where we are. If anybody has thoughts on that, feel free. Bob, I see you have your hand up. Let's go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't know where my computer hand is. I'm doing.
Don't worry
the
about it.
old-fashioned wave.
I'll show you. Amber will show you.
One thing I learned is the Norwich District does have a heavy reliance on grants. So in my perfect world of budgeting, I would envision a school budget for each individual school of the 9 schools, the 2 middle schools and the 7 elementary schools. And when I went into Munis and looked at the detail there, I was pretty surprised that there is no line item for what I call your core educational materials. There's some, but it's very limited. Every place I've been in the world in a school district, each school would have a line item for specific items like phys ed supplies, textbooks, library books, periodicals, science lab supplies, and things like that. It's identified and you can manage and track, and it's a needs-based budget that the principals or building or teachers put in for. If someone were to ask me how much has Norwich Public Schools spent on, say, textbooks by each school? From the existing financial system, I couldn't tell you because it doesn't exist. It's not funded that way. I would have to go up and see Tamara and rely on, a lot of that is coming through the Alliance grants. And she knows because she's been a part of that, and it can pull it out of her head and the spreadsheets that she has. A lot of those core items should be funded directly through the Board of Education and not through a grant. The grant should be supplemental. And to Dr. Stringfellow's thing, if getting out of the Alliance District category takes away that funding, well, right now, a significant portion of the supplies for education is being funded by the grants. We might have some global pots of money in the district, like for instructional supplies, but that really belongs at each school level, so you know what's being spent at each school. If administrators like Tamara or Dr. Stringfellow are trying to improve a program, and dollars aren't necessarily the measure of improvement, but at least you know how much you're spending and where you're spending it on. We can't tell right now very readily without doing a ton of work. So if there's a way of having some of this money stay, we need to start establishing line item budgets for core educational supplies, the basics, to get that piece out of the grants, as opposed to some of the staffing positions as well.
That's, again, that's very helpful. That adds to my understanding of how that's happening. And again, this is kind of the mysterious part of the budget up until now has been, okay, so what are the grants paying for and how are we using them? And that, but then there again, I want to make sure I say this correctly, but the council shouldn't be weighing in on those on those things. The council shouldn't be circumventing the board of the superintendent of schools and circumventing the board. I mean, to the superintendent of schools and saying, why aren't you using the grants for this or for that? But to understand how the grants are being used is helpful to me, right? So. I'm hopeful that again, part of our purpose and part of our scope is to pull back the veil a little bit and have the transparency so that we have better understanding. Those of us on the council have better understanding, even if it's just from an informational standpoint.
I think in my short time, Dr. Stringfellow and Tamara have started to discover all these things, and we're in the process of fixing it. But if there hasn't been a line item budget historically for those core items within the school buildings, and they've just been funded through grants, I mean, there's no history there. That would be coming from the business office to make sure those things are in place.
Well, it's no surprise to me that with a new superintendent and a new business manager, and now an assistant superintendent of schools that understands the Alliance grant and the Alliance district side of the ledger, that things are changing, right? And they're changing for the better. And but it's still a process. Mark, I see that you have your hand up. Go right ahead.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of these things shouldn't be part of a grant process, but the fact of the matter, our financial situation, is dictated otherwise, obviously. But more than that, I'm concerned that what happens if, God forbid, I'm saying, God forbid, that our performance goes up and things get better, and we lose eligibility for a lot of this stuff. So. So what are we doing? Are we incentivizing ourselves to have an underperforming school district? That's what I'm thinking. And I really don't want to. I don't want to be in that position, to be honest with you. So I think Dr. Stringfellow's tact and what Bob was saying. I mean, they're on the money. The issue is what can we afford to do on an ongoing basis to do that? We gotta, I think we need to move forward and try to make the situation better. The problem is we've run into a situation where, we've had literally decades of neglect, and this is not this didn't happen all at once. This has been happening for many years, and we're a distressed community. That's been the case for many years. And we need to try to, work on both those things. So, what like I said, I'm scared of is that we are basically incentivizing our school district to do poorly, and I don't think that's a good thing. So,
And I think to add to your comment, Mark, is that if we continue down this road, it does have an impact on the city. It has an impact on, businesses that come into the city, families that come into the city, because, the first thing they look for is, what kind of school system that we have.
Absolutely right. Tricia, I see you have your hand up. Go right ahead.
Sorry, forgot to unmute.
That's okay.
One response to Mark, I know that there is not a teacher in the district goes to work in the morning thinking, I'm not going to let my kids do well today, or I hope they're not going to do well today. No, they are working to make sure that every child achieves to the highest level that they are able to achieve.
yeah, I would never suggest that, Tricia. So,
Okay, but I think it needs to be said. Nobody is going to work saying we're going to do a lousy job, because that's just not in them to do that. But I will also say, and I know some of you have lived here all your lives. I've lived here, 45 years or so. And to be honest, this town has never really put much value on education. There's always some reason that they can't raise the money to fund the school system adequately. And until we find a way to turn that around, and to do, I don't want to say a PR job, that's not at all what I mean, but pardon the pun, to educate people about the value of education in terms of what it does for the economic development of the city and the aspects of bringing people in who are going to live here and add to the community. Until we can do that, I'm not sure much is going to change. And it just means that we're in this cycle that just goes around and around and we never get out of it. For what that's worth.
No, that point, if I may, I'll take the floor for a moment here. Tricia, that point is well taken. Obviously, everyone here knows that I'm an educator, right? So the process, I guess, or the shift that we're in right now, to me, is one of a cultural shift. And I mean by a cultural shift, we need to develop a culture in this community that education is an investment, not an expense. Right? So that's where and then we're talking about a generational, this could take an entire generation. And for me, I may be overly optimistic, right? Here, but when I got into this, pursuing this leadership role in public policy here with the city, one of the things that drove me was to change some of the cultural beliefs and norms in this community. And one of them for me is the way we view our education system. And I believe that I share that with every member of the council. It really until we've reached this point, there has always been so many question marks about how the budget actually works. We never really were able to talk more about the most important thing is what is the education budget designed to do, right? And it's designed to be an investment in our young people, not, a begrudging expense that, oh, well, because we have families, we have to educate their kids, and I know I'm over dramatizing that a little bit, but again, it's that thought, that change of cultural of cultural thought of, what education really does mean for a community. Stacy, you have your hand up. Go right ahead.
Okay, so we have to remember that 64% of our budget is spent on education. And I don't think that's, that's a lot of money. 64% of our budget is education. So I think I certainly place a lot of value on education. I think most people do. Maybe there are some who are out there that say, well, if you got through high school, that's good enough. We get $23 million worth of grants. That is going to be a huge dollar amount for us, for the city of Norwich, to try to come up with if we got rid of all the grants that we got in the last year. What's coming in between 19, I understand some of these grants are 2 years, 3 years, but it's $23 million. So we tack on another $23 million to the taxpayers and say we're not taking any grant funding. We're shooting ourselves in the foot, because there will be a mass exodus out of the city of Norwich. New London, no better, because I'm looking at their 2021, they get $27 million worth of grants. There's no way, unfortunately, we are stuck with a lot of these grants, because the taxpayers cannot come up with this money. And unless all of a sudden we've got some ginormous business that comes in that's going to be paying $20 million a year in taxes, we're not going to be able to do this. I'm sorry to say that. It hurts me to say that, but that's the reality of where we are. So we have to use the grants to our best of our ability, capitalizing on the grants that are out there, because somebody else, if we don't take the money, somebody else is. Some other town is going to say, listen, Norwich doesn't want the grants anymore, give them to me. So we have to find the balance between what the taxpayers can afford and how much we need to educate our students properly. And I've said that before. I'll say it again. I mean, we're in a tough position, no doubt. But I don't see how we just get rid of $23 million worth of grants and put it into put it on the taxpayers' backs. It would have to be phased in over multiple years. But that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you for that. But I would just add that I don't think that anybody's advocating, nor would the state just make us go cold turkey and say, oh, sorry, you're not getting that money anymore. However, if the state doesn't have it to give, then that's a problem. That would be a huge problem for us. Tricia, you had your hand up from the first time you spoke.
No, I want to make a comment.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. I don't think we're talking about going cold turkey on the grants by any means. More what I was talking about was trying to change the mindset of the community so that the education budget is not a drag and a burden, but rather an investment. And we've really never had that. And a year and a half ago, no, I guess it's more like 2 years now, I read a book called Our Towns, which I will send the information around to the committee if you'd like me to do so. And it was a book that the author and his, husband and wife authors went around and visited a number of economically depressed towns across the country, many of which made a comeback. And there was one chapter that really stayed with me because they talked about And it sounded very much like the situation that Norwich is in. And they chose consciously to invest in the education budget. And that ended, even though they really couldn't, quote, afford it, but it ended up being a very positive thing because they were able to attract development and industry, whatever it was. And I don't remember all the details now, but that's the kind of thing that I think I'm talking about, that it seems to me that we need, where people start seeing this as because at the moment, what I'm hearing from friends who are realtors is people are saying, somebody wants to buy a house. And yes, houses are turning over very quickly at the moment. But if anybody is coming into one of the major employers, they don't necessarily recommend coming to Norwich. People are going to get advised to go live someplace else, and it's almost invariably where the perceptions of the schools are, test scores are higher and that kind of thing. And the only way that changes is if we can invest and bring the students up to a level. And now I will put my hand down.
All right, thank you. Mark, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, my
Yeah,
hand
thank
is
you.
down.
I agree with what you said before, Joe, about, no one's suggesting that we go cold turkey. The superintendent's obviously looking for 1.22 million more than we allotted. So to inch to that, to a better place. The fact is that by using those grants for basics, let's just call them, basic core educational things, we're not making use of the grant money in a way really that's probably intended, which it should be for, extra items to improve the quality of education for the children in the city of Norwich. So that's, I think, the point that the superintendent's trying to make in these discussions. Not that I'm here to make our case, but the excuse me, a frog in my throat here. The fact that those grant funds should be used for the extras, so for things that.
Oops. Mark, we lost your audio.
Hang on, let me just do that.
Okay.
My mouse went to the other screen. So I was using the space bar. So basically those grant funds should be used, for the extras for the most part. That's where our goal should be. And our true goal, really, the big picture, is to make a better, educational department in the city of Norwich, to educate our kids better, to give them the best opportunity they can have going forward in the world. So, I got a pretty darn good foundation going to schools here in Norwich and then to NFA. And when I got done with NFA, I wasn't in too bad a shape. I could function as a human being in society, but, and then I, went on in college and a few times and did whatever. But in their case, in a lot of people's cases, they don't have the same opportunities these days. They're struggling financially in this city. A lot of people are, and not, for the traditional reasons that people say. They're just not working in high-paying jobs. There's a lot of service industry and all that. Those are all considerations that, we're trying to find some kind of balance here, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And these are not easy. I don't think these are decisions that Joe, you or I or Stacy take lightly, so on the city council. I certainly don't. So, I want to help if I can, and I want to do the, quote unquote, right thing if I can. But at the same time, there's got to be that balance, with the rest of the city budget. So, we're in a situation where they're not, the Board of Ed is not the only city department. We've sacrificed, government services on occasion to help the Board of Ed, and I really think we need to recover some government services in this budget. So I'm concerned about some of those things. as well as I am about the Board of Education. But, again, we can't just go spending, willy-nilly. So there's got to be some kind of balance here. Maybe we can do better. I would ask the superintendent if that 500,000, if she would rather have it in a non-lapsing account, or if she would rather have it applied to her budget this year. So that would be the question I would ask.
I took a note.
All right. So,
Thank you.
I could live with either one of those, but, but again, I think we just, we need to have some kind of balance here and try to, and if we're going to move in certain directions, it'd be nice to do everything we can for everybody. But the money is just not there to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bob, you've been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'll just have one last comment, and it's about grants. I think everyone's comments about trying to absorb $23 million in grants, that would be, I think, virtually impossible for any community. And I know Jamie's on here and Tamara, and they know far more about the grant process in Norwich than I do at this point. But I think the significant portion of the grant funding will not go away once Norwich uplifts out of the priority area. I mean, all of your title grants, Title I, Title II, 3, and 4, your IDEA grants, those are federally funded, and every district gets those to some degree. I think my personal opinion, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, those grants would remain. It's mostly your grants that are tied to improving the academic performance because we're in the bottom of the state. And those are the Alliance grants. And I don't know the exact numbers of those yet. They're probably in the $5 to $6 million range. That's where some of the core textbooks are coming from and things like that.
If you don't mind, I can kind of
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit.
You were my next person.
Thank you.
Right.
So I don't know if you all recall, it might have been about 2 years ago when the state CSDE said, oh, we're no longer going to fund the team program.
Mhm.
And it's going to come out of district funds. And when I tell you that districts were not prepared for that, and there was this big uproar as to, okay, how are we going to support beginning teachers? And so I am a little concerned with the amount of funding that's coming through the CARES Act, because I know at some point Connecticut is going to have to figure out how are they going to make this all up with all this spending that's coming through. So I'm just a little concerned about that. But anyway, when I think about, so Title I is in fact for low performing students. And typically what happens with that is we look at the number, we look at our students, the number of students that we have that are Title I schools, Title I students who are low performing. We do a cost, an average cost amount per student. And then those funds are directed towards those schools to help support student performance in those schools. So that's how Title I is. When it comes to Title II is teacher quality. So that's where your professional development provides. So like, for example, I think about in the district initiative where we want to move towards, let's say, mastery-based learning or standards-based learning or equity. Well, there's education that has to go along with that in order to help support the work in moving students and moving the work forward such that we see the impact in student results. With Title III, that's with our English language acquisition. So our ESL, you may know it that way in terms of ESL, bilingual, that's where Title III comes from. And so those funds, and I can speak to the amounts of those shortly, but those funds are designed to help support that specific need. And then when we talk about Title IV, that's our after school program. that's Century 21. We already, as of this moment in time, you know, we don't technically offer, we offer limited, I would say, you know, after school programming in collaboration with some of our organizations that are in our local organizations that are in the city. And so with that, so what that means is, so let's take Alliance. The Alliance grant is about just under $7 million. Out of $7 million, in terms of, you know, salaries and benefits, we're talking about 5 million of that is spent on trying to meet student needs by hiring the staff that we need. And so I agree with what everyone has said, that although, no, we just don't want to arbitrarily take away, you know, and assume that we're going to move 23 million this year and say, okay, well, fine, let's put it in a general fund. Absolutely not. That would be insane. I agree, we do need a plan over time such that as our grant funding reduce, one, the unintended consequence of doing better, but two, what we're also not factoring is our needs might also increase, and our grant funding that we may have at that time might not be able to meet all of our needs. So we run into a huge issue with relying on the grants. And at any point in time, although yes, we can always continue to have Alliance funding, yes, we will have the titles, but you don't know to what level they will be funded depending on the economic status of the country and of the state.
Oh, good points. Thank you for that. Stacy, you did have your hand up.
Tamara spoke
Oh.
about what I was going to, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, that was all very good conversations. Does anybody have anything else on this particular issue, which I remind you was just we're really talking about the 1.2 million gap between city manager's proposed budget and the board's adopted budget. Stacy.
All right, so I will say one more thing, since we're circling back around now.
Yeah.
I specifically asked the superintendent the night of the budget hearing
Mhm.
about the $1.2 million. And did she feel if we did not fund that the council went with the city manager's recommended dollar amount for the Board of Education, would she be able to find that in any of the grants that were coming up, whether it be ESSER funds, CARES, all of those? I don't know all the acronyms, but all of the money that was COVID related, would she be able to find that $1.2 million? And I hope everybody heard her say that she would. And that's all I just want to remind everyone, because I specifically asked her about the $1.2 million difference and what the board asked for and what the city manager recommended. She said she would find it.
Yes, thank you. Okay, anyone have anything else on this item? No, well, thank you again for that conversation. It was both illuminating and, for me, exactly what I had hoped that this committee would do. Moving on then to item B, which is discussion and possible action on the BOE capital projects. And under this, I have a question about one specific project, but and not to catalog all of the projects, but my hope on this agenda item was after I ask about one specific project, to have a brief conversation, if the committee is so inclined, about the concept of this non-lapsing fund for capital projects that would be initially funded by the small surplus, the relatively small surplus in this year, projected, I should say, in this year's budget. So my question, and I know the superintendent isn't here, and I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but we pretty much know that the Stanton boiler is a $2 million job.
Bob can speak to this, Joe.
Okay, perfect. So we know that that's a $2 million job, and I heard that, well, it might only be 1.3, whatever it is. What is the board and the administration's intention of how the city is going to pay for that? Because, and Heather has heard me, Heather and I had this conversation, and I said that I don't want to go another winter with that boiler that's there. And it was held together with Band-Aids and bubble gum and baling wire all last winter. I don't think we should chance it twice, but we got to figure out how to pay for it. Bob, go right ahead.
Okay, I'll try to keep it as brief and non-boring as I can, but I actually think I have positive news. I think I might have scared some of the board members 2 weeks ago at my first board meeting that we might not have a viable project regardless of where the funding is coming from based on the proposals that came in and the conditions and so on and so forth. So I called an engineering firm that the city is familiar with. It was Van Zelm Engineering Firm. They did the Kelly Middle School project, and I think everyone would agree that project came out well. So Matt Brown and I met with the representatives from them, probably it's 2 weeks ago now. And we defined the scope of the project very specifically. We made them aware that Stanton School is in the master plan of the Board of Ed in the city of remaining as a school, and it would either be, we didn't know what it would look like in the future, renovate as new or something else. So we did have this immediate problem with the boiler, but we didn't want to spend money, a lot of money on something, and then 2 or 3 years down the road, find out we wasted $1 million or $2 million. That would be bad business choice. So we gave them a task of assessing the situation and come up with a solution to just replace the existing boilers and controls specific to that, and see what they could do, existing ductwork for air filtration and that stuff. So they seemed pretty positive with that, and they went back and worked up a proposal. Matt and I then met with Bob Castronova on the city side from a purchasing side, and Bob and Matt were both wonderful to work with. They came back out and we had a Zoom meeting on Friday, and their plan, they think it's a very simple project and not this big elaborate thing that people had an impression of. Their initial idea is to replace the 2 boilers with a series of 4 or 5 high efficiency modulating condensing gas-fired boilers. Those are much smaller in nature, and the number of boilers would be dependent on the heat load and so on and so forth. And, they think it would take them about 2 weeks to get working documents up that can be distributed to specific contractors to come up with actual pricing. When we pressed them for a ballpark price, they think the entire project could be done for under $500,000. So we could be in the $300,000 to $400,000 area. That's dependent on how much asbestos abatement is required and the labor to dismantle the stuff that's there. So that, even if it's $500,000, that's a significant difference from 1.4 or 2.4 million. And that's a different conversation. So the superintendent had scheduled a meeting for the first week of May with Josh and John to discuss this and the funding matter. So that's happening the 1st of May. Hopefully by then we'll have a better idea on what the cost will be. If, as an example, the engineering firm said if it's 4 high efficiency boilers, a ballpark would be $25,000 a piece. So you'd be looking at $100,000 for the boilers, and the rest of the money would be for asbestos abatement and demolition and installation. And as far as getting the project done before heating season, there's a few hurdles that would need to be overcome. One would be availability of boilers. You could be looking at a 12 to 16 week period. So there's ways to get around that. the boilers could be pre-ordered in a couple weeks with the contractor taking delivery of them. If they did come in, if that time frame was 12 to 16 weeks, the boilers would be getting here in early August probably. But that would work because school would be out and demolition would probably take 4 to 6 weeks. So that process could be ongoing while the boilers came in. The heat needs or the boiler needs in September and early October are really for hot water and some moderate heating during cool downs at night, that sort of thing. And they felt that 2 boilers hooked up temporarily could satisfy those needs. And the remaining work could actually be ongoing while school is in session because it's in an area that wouldn't be on a roof. It wouldn't be disruptive to the classrooms. There's some things that have to be ironed out. There might be some venting issues with the chimney and things like that. So I feel a lot better about this project than I did 2 weeks ago, both in terms of dollar cost and getting it done. So we'll know more probably within 2 weeks. And again, availability of the boilers and also contractor availability to get the work done because they're booking up fast. Those would be determining factors on whether the project could be done this summer, but I feel a whole lot better that we can have a project. And as we discussed the renovations going forward, and they felt the boilers could probably be either reused or relocated, and you wouldn't be wasting your money. And this would be by far the better solution than the other 2 options that were proposed. So I guess and this would also be a much more efficient system. These boilers operated about a 90 to 95% efficiency. The existing boilers are probably about 65%. So you wouldn't see as many windows wide open when you have moderate heating needs because the boilers are always on. And one benefit, this is a hot water system in place, not a steam system like some of the real old systems. So that's actually works in our favor. So that's the basic summary of where we are with the boilers. And I would, again, Bob has been awesome to work with on the city and Matt Brown as well.
Well, that's encouraging news, and I appreciate all of that. Does anybody have any other questions on this particular issue? I see Stacy just raised her hand. Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to ask if we're, and I don't know if it qualifies or it doesn't qualify, but this type of work, is there, and I hate to even ask, but is that under any kind of CARES Act money can be used towards if we're improving the quality of the heating or the air in the building? Is that a
So
approved use of any kind of grant money specifically from COVID-19?
Well, I know the application for ESSER 2 has been submitted already, so it wouldn't be under that. We don't know the final dollar numbers for the American Recovery Plan, other than it's going to be a lot of money. We don't know the requirements, and usually the mechanical improvements, the HVAC improvements are for air quality, and this would not be affecting the air quality, it would just be heat. And it's also a condition that's been in place for 2 or 3 years, so it might be, but I wouldn't count on it, and we won't know yet until we actually see the rules.
And I'll add to
I was
that.
just hoping that it'd be something you'd consider, if it was an approved use of the money, that certainly you consider doing that.
So if I may just give a little add to what Bob's explanation. The other caveat that we're not thinking about is the timing of the approval of the grant. So as of right now, we have, nothing really from the state as of yet in terms of, receiving the application. So typically what they have us do is do a needs assessment first, then, provide us with the due date of when these things are due, the requirements with it. Once we submit, then CSDE then reviews the application. And I don't know how much time that they would allow for review. So just to give you an example, we have to submit our upcoming Alliance grant in May. And so a portion of that grant, they've asked for us to submit just the summer school portion of it. And they wanted it 4 weeks in advance so that they could have that time to review that. So, and that's just the portion of it before we even begin to submit the actual Alliance grant. And so with that process, with us not having the information as of yet, not even the application, we don't know what the time frame. So it's probable that we would actually miss this school year, or we would be into the winter or starting winter by the time we, if we were to use those funds to get this going.
Yep. Hang on 1 second, Bob. Mark, you had your hand up.
I was thinking I've been talking too much anyway. Let everybody else have this
Oh.
on this before I chime in.
Okay, Bob had something to add. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Bob.
Tamara's points are well taken. For this project to happen this summer, those boilers probably will need to be ordered in early May at the latest. Unless when the engineers come back and say it's a Weil McLean or it's a Buderus this, and they happen to be in stock. So we won't know that for a few weeks yet.
So if you ordered it, we would have to figure out where those funds coming from to displace it so that when the grant funds come in, we could use it. And as of right now, we have no other grant funds available.
Okay, all right. Mark?
All right, obviously, the city has some options here, at least one in particular anyway. So, we could, if the number stays in the range you're talking about, we can obviously pony up on at least a temporary basis. We could do a bond ordinance or something in that neighborhood, something like that, to get it done, to make sure that the job is authorized for payment. But if we can get a grant to actually cover the expense, then that would be obviously the preferable thing. So obviously, like I said, the timing's bad, but like you said, so but I mean, we could front the money first, I guess, and deal with that issue afterwards. Maybe. Not sure if it'll work that way, but
Then we have to hope it's approved. That's the other caveat.
Right.
well, it needs to get done one way or the other. So it's not, if it doesn't get approved, then we'd be in the same boat regardless. So that's all.
So, yeah, so to me, it's well, let's keep fingers crossed that it stays in this range of, $500,000 somewhere in that neighborhood, or, versus 4 times that. So the other item, and thank
I
you
had a-
both.
I had a quick question,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
On
Just,
this-
yes, on this specific, before you
Okay.
moved on,
Yeah,
that's why.
thank you. Yep, go ahead.
Just picking back off what Mark said, I just wanted to get a clarification question if it is within the purview of this committee to make a recommendation to the city council to do that bond authorization for the boiler. Just wanted to get that clarification once we get all the information in place.
I'll leave that to the chair. I don't know if it's the purview, this committee is formed mainly for the budget, but it's an expense. So certainly we could consider it, I
Yeah,
guess.
I would say that that there would be no harm if once we got a little further along and we knew exactly what the dollar amounts were going to be, and it was the committee's will to send a letter to a formal communication to the council. I wouldn't have a problem with that, even though it's not part of the line item budget. It is an expense of the school system that the council has to consider. So as I said, if it was the committee's will, I would not have a problem with us communicating that to the council. Christine.
That's what I was just going to ask Joe, because the thing is, it sounds like from the timeline that Bob is just presenting, even though I know nothing's precise because of the ordering, et cetera. But he needs to know, it sounds like after that meeting, the first week of May, and we don't meet for, what, another month, if he can give the go ahead. So does that mean that he'll be submitting, as of then, he'll be going to you folks, right? He'll be having to make a presentation to you,
Well,
and then we'll be out of that circle.
and again, none of that hinges on this committee's
Right, that's
action,
what I
right?
mean.
That
Yeah.
that is really, that's a fluid situation where the city manager will, will
Okay.
be point on that for the council and will.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you folks would be in on that part at all. So that's what I mean. So as of basically right now, we're out of that because the time frame. So after Bob gets to have that meeting, gets some more information, it'll be him and the purchasing manager and John Solomoni. We're out of that then, right? And thank you, Bob. That sounds wonderful. Thank you for your hard work.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, just that kind of action on the council's part does take some cooperation from both sides of the political spectrum. So it's not, it's no slam dunk, obviously, but I would hope that because of what the options really are there, that I would think that we'd look favorably on that. But I just want to point that out. It does take 5 votes on the council to pass the bonding ordinance. That's all. And it does take a little time to pass a bonding ordinance. So, I mean, because we're right now, coming into the last week of April. And so
that's what I mean.
The ordinance has got to be drafted. It's got to have a first reading before the city council and then go for a public hearing and then be voted on at the next meeting. So it's going to take a little time. So we can't be delaying too far on this. I don't think it's going to fit in the committee's time frame is what my point.
Absolutely right. And again, and it doesn't, as I said a moment ago, and it doesn't hinge on us. It's not like it would have to be referred to us first before any of that happened. Right.
So hopefully all the other committee, everything can get moving along, and even if they have to special meeting to get this done, because it is of the utmost importance based on how long it takes to have all this done. So I just hope that's kept in mind,
Well,
as
and
we
it
move down
will
there.
be, and that's what we rely on the city manager and staff to, to essentially manage that.
Mhm.
for us.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Carlene, you still have your hand up? You have another? No, okay. All right. So I'd like it to move us on, if there's nothing more on the boiler, to the second piece, the broader topic of this, let's just call it a non-lapsing capital fund, right? Just to give it a name, right? With this projected surplus in this year's budget. My question is simple. How do the committee members, if you'd like to speak on that as a concept, what would your feelings be? If you have any, feel free, the floor is open. Bob.
I'm not a council member or anything like that, but I think it might help the discussion if I briefly outline what the statutory rules are for doing this.
Okay.
It's governed by Connecticut Statute 10-248-A. And what that does is it allows the fiscal authority of a town or municipality, which in this case, I'm not sure if it's the city council or the mayor, or who's the fiscal authority, probably the town council, I believe. You can establish the non-lapsing fund, and any monies remaining from the Board of Education, up to 2%, can be set aside each year into that fund. And there are 3 criteria to that. One, the amount each year deposited cannot exceed 2%. And 2, the expenditures within that account can only be used for educational purposes. And 3, the money can only be spent with the approval of the Board of Education. So if the council or the authorities in Norwich were to establish this account, and each year they could vote on whether to put any remaining surplus into that fund. You don't have to do it every year. You could do it one year and not the next. once that money's in there, it could be used for educational purposes, it could be capital, it could be to fund operating expenses. But the superintendent cannot spend the money without Board of Education approval. So for argument's sake, say $500,000 left over and the city decided to establish this fund and it was put in there. Then the Board of Education, at the superintendent's request, could authorize it to be used for capital projects. It could be if there was an unexpected increase in special ed tuitions that was going to cause a budget overage. Those are the types of things that could be used for, but it would have to be with Board of Ed approval. And I've seen some communities put restrictions on it that go outside beyond the statute, saying it can only be capital projects. But that defeats the purpose of the statute and its intent, because you might have a year where you might have a $200,000 shortfall that you have to make up. And if you had money in that fund, then you don't have to go to the city or town to ask for it. And it would, again, only with Board of Ed approval.
Right.
So that's the history and how the process works.
Well, and that's very informative, because according to what you just said, and I believe you, okay, and the city manager can pipe in here in a moment if he would like. What Alderman Bettencourt said earlier about asking the superintendent to choose whether, you know, what to do with that surplus, and doesn't impact whether the council decides to create this non-lapsing fund based on what you just said, because that money would be there. And if it was to cover a shortfall in next year's budget, that would, or capital, the money's there. And as long as there are no restrictions on it, as you said, no additional restrictions.
But the city would still have to create the
Of course.
non-lapsing fund, and each year make a decision to approve all of it, a portion of it, or something of it. So once the fund is created, the concept is there, but it still would require action each year to do that. So for instance, suppose the decision was made to create this non-lapsing fund and we had a $500,000 surplus, then the council, the superintendent would, on behalf of the board, through the Board of Education, would make a request to deposit the surplus into that, and then the city council would debate it and take action, and you could either approve all of it, a portion of it, or none of it. And if the same thing happened the following year, you again have to take action each year. So there's safeguards for the town as well. And I can send a copy, or anyone can Google, it's Connecticut Statute 10-248A. So it's a short statute, it's not hard to read, and it's not in all legal language. It's very, very brief.
Well, thank you for that. That's again, very informative. Would anybody else like to speak on this concept? Mark, I see you have a hand up. Go ahead.
Just briefly, because I already said my piece before pretty much on the subject, but from what Bob is saying though, yeah, I'd say, geez, then I think the choice is pretty clear, is to put it in the non-lapsing account. And then, yeah, if the Board of Ed wants to use it for whatever purpose, then I guess they could do that, but then, and we'll go from there. But I would want, I would certainly rather it be held in case there's a greater need at, say the end of the year, or there's a capital expense, but that's, again, would be up to the Board of Ed.
Right. Stacy.
So I guess I'm going to ask Bob this.
Go
So
ahead.
it would, whatever dollar amount is in there could only be used for a capital project and only be used if there was a shortfall? Is that what I heard you say? Or you end up with the $200,000 extra in there and you decide, well, let's hire another teacher, or let's, I don't know. Is it very specific, the statute, on that it has to be a shortfall, or it has to be a capital project, or can it just be used for anything?
Now, I can read you the two sentences that will answer that question specifically, and then add one thing to it. Item 2, each expenditure from such account shall be made only for educational purposes. And 3, each such expenditure shall be authorized by the local Board of Education for such town. So basically, it doesn't have to be used for capital. It could be used for any educational expenditure, but only by approval of the Board of Education. Some towns have put restrictions on it when they crafted the creation of the account to specifically say only capital projects. But by doing that, if you had a case where there were a shortfall in special education, for example, or some other unexpected expense like a non-capital emergency, a fire panel control, if it were deemed not to be capital, you would have to amend the creation of the account or you couldn't use it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, and as I understand it, this would, that if the council were to act, this would be an ordinance.
I don't know if it's an ordinance or what the exact creation of it is. I don't know how you create the account. Josh would probably be more expert with that than I would, and same thing with John.
Yeah.
I mean, several towns in the area have done it. Lebanon did it. I think Preston did it, and it's become more and more commonplace as emergencies have happened.
I'll go out on a limb and say that if it has to do with spending this taxpayer dollars, it has to be an ordinance. But Josh has got his hand up. He's going to weigh in. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, this would be an ordinance.
Yeah.
But you know, the subsequent actions, once an ordinance was established, could probably be accomplished by a resolution.
Here we go. Sing, anything else, John? I mean, Josh? No?
Nope, I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sing.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
my question is that just limited to educational purposes like that Bob was reading the lines, or do you think any department can create these kind of funds?
This is only for, this particular statute is only for the Board of Education budgets within a town or municipality.
Okay.
And keep in mind, you know, part of our annual budget is the capital account that you know, that is part of the budget that the council adopts, right? So, and that capital accounts for all capital projects citywide.
And we do build some contingency in there too.
Yes, right, yeah, yeah. Bob, something
I
else?
can give you an example how the town of Lebanon, they created this about 4 years ago. And last year, the high school needed a new oil tank. So they, at a town meeting, appropriated $75,000 for the oil tank and identified the remaining $110,000 to come from the non-lapsing fund. Next year, they were going to have a shortfall in special education, so that they approved the use of funds for special education expending. So it's been, for that town, it's been a very beneficial thing when there was surplus from the Board of Ed, because it's not an open spending account. The Board of Ed, as the responsible body overseeing education, has to approve the expense. It's not up to the superintendent or the business manager to go spend money.
Okay. So anything else on from any of the members on this concept, whether it be questions or just your own thoughts on the matter? Heather.
I guess I'll just officially go on record saying that I think this is a step in the right direction for the board, and I would support that creation.
Thank you for that. I think the next logical step would, well, before I say that, Sing, you have your hand back up?
Yeah, so how soon do you think council will have to approve this idea, or if we are moving forward with this? step?
It takes me right where I was about to go. I'll only speak for myself. I think that the next logical step is for the city manager and corporation counsel to start to draft language. And once we have that, it can get on this the council's agenda, and the council can debate the issue. And certainly, as I said, I would have no problem with the committee weighing in when that it is part of our agenda. And
I would think it would need to happen before the end of the fiscal year, though. Just saying.
I think you're right, even though we may not know what the exact dollar amount is going to be. You're right. So yeah, I would agree.
At least the account creation.
So will ad hoc committee will be giving favorable recommendation on this issue, or?
Well, at this point, we don't have a motion in front of us to do any such thing.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to make one.
Great.
Mhm.
Am I allowed to speak?
Oh, of course you're allowed to speak.
No, that sounded like
So-
not how I wanted it
So
to sound, but anyways.
it sounds like the Heather Romansky, the chair of the BOE, has made a motion that the ad hoc committee
Recommend.
recommend to the council the creation of a non-lapsing account for ...
For the Board of
Or
Education.
Board of
please?
Board of Education.
Yeah.
I'll
for-
second it.
Okay.
Singh.
All right, seconded by Singh. Is
on
there any,
Melinda.
is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, by roll call, we will vote. Okay, Christine DeStazio,
Yes.
Carleen Sharmalis,
Yes.
Singh Khalsa,
Yes.
Patricia Staley,
Yes,
Heather Romansky,
Yes.
Mark Betancourt,
Yes.
Stacy Gould,
Yes,
and the chair votes yes. Well, we have a unanimous vote 9-0 to send a favorable, which is not say not a favorable recommendation, but a recommendation to the council for the creation of a non-lapsing account for the Board of Education. I will draft such a letter on behalf of this committee, and I'll have Corporation Counsel just look it over, and I will then send it to the clerk to be placed on the council's agenda. And
yeah,
thank
Joe,
you all.
does it need to say anything about this, the state statute that allows you to create this?
That, and yeah, that's
Or that would
exactly,
maybe have to be in the ordinance?
Well, I would
Probably,
def-
don't you think that would be
yeah.
in the ordinance?
it definitely would be in the ordinance, okay? But that was the first question for Corporation Counsel from me,
Right,
exactly.
or we could say as permitted by state statute.
Statute, right.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah,
Right.
clearly that was my intention, that we're obviously are gonna follow.
Well,
I need a vacation. Follow.
Well, and the language in the ordinance is really the key, right? That's the most important part. I just want to make
Absolutely.
sure that the letter is on point, right?
Yep.
So, okay.
Right, well, I just think the recommendation, because somebody's gonna say, oh, they're recommending this and who else does it? Well, if there's a state statute that allows it,
Right.
I would put it in there ahead of time
Yeah.
so that we don't get all these people saying, oh, you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, you can't do. No, there's already precedent set for this.
Yep.
Right. And
That's a very good
legislation
point.
in place. Right. That's a great point. Singh, have your hand back up.
Yeah, I just have one request. I think when this whole procedure take place, like sometimes you can limit those funds to just the capital improvement. But my recommendation is we shouldn't do that and leave it flexible so that money can be used for whichever purpose we need. Because some towns do put the limitation on it. And you do have flexibility to do that, but the statute itself is very general. So we should leave it that way. So it can be used for various different purposes whenever we need that. Of course, it will still need the approval from Board of Education. So, you
Well, as a
know,
matter, right, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done.
Yeah, I'm
as a-
done. Thank you.
Okay, as a matter of record, in this recorded meeting, right, that's clearly the intent. Again, it'll be the language in the ordinance, right, that will be devoid of those kinds of restrictions, right? So I think that if we make that intention clear, okay, that's the way the ordinance will be written.
Excellent.
Thank you all for that. I'm just making a note to myself so that I get the text correctly. And with that, is there any more discussion on that matter? I think we took care of it by that motion, so thank you very much. So moving on to item number 6, agenda items for future meetings.
I would like an update from Bob on where we are at with the boiler by then, if possible.
On the boiler, okay. So I will leave discussion and possible action on capital projects on the agenda. And Bob now knows that we'll get an update from him. Anything else that would like to see put on the agenda?
Well, I would think that it would be on, Joe, but I'll just say it, you know, where they are with the budget for the
Right.
end of this year.
Yes, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
also,
say
yeah.
that Bob should provide sort of an update on how much progress he's been able to made in relation to the his sort of opening statement, if you will, the work that he had, you know, the stuff that he'd already gone through and is reconciling, and the stuff that he's continuing to work on. So just an update on that.
Plus, we'll have heard about the boiler at our next Board of Ed meeting, which occurs before the next ad hoc committee meeting. So we'll already have that
Right.
information. And also the liaisons that we have from the city council will be informed then also. Well, they'll probably know all about it by then anyways, if things move quickly,
Well,
hopefully.
I mean, when you say liaison, are you talking about the budget expenditure committee liaison? They don't
No,
always.
the ones from, doesn't Daryl and somebody else?
Yeah,
They're
Alderman Wilson
throughout-
and Alderwoman Gould are your liaisons, but
Liaisons, yeah.
yep.
But I thought that was just to the budget expenditure subcommittee.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks. Like I
That's what
said, I'm leaving
No,
for
I'm getting
vacation like in
confused.
12 hours and I am,
Well, you should be
Yeah.
going in about 2.
I'll be quiet. You don't have to speak, then be quiet. No, no, I'm just thinking, you know, to Carlene's question is that everyone's gonna know about it by, you know, because we'll have our Board of Ed meeting and Bob will report about it then, and the city council have heard about it, I'm sure by then, because of, you know, the funds will have to be discussed. So, that's all.
I'll just say at the meetings, there'll be formal reports, but as soon as we know something, we'll continue moving, and I think the word is gonna spread.
And, you know, just to close that point, as always, if any member thinks of something, you know, that you would like to see me put on the agenda, just send me an email. I have absolutely no problem adding anything. It doesn't have to be, you know, tonight. Okay. And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn. Carleen makes a motion to adjourn,
Heather Romansky, second.
seconded by Heather Romansky.
Sure there's nothing else to talk about?
Right, hell, it was only an hour and a half. Come on,
Only, yes.
right? Okay, so,
Oops, I accidentally hit the end meeting button. No, I'm kidding.
is it? That's
You're
not
still-
funny.
You're still
Okay.
recording.
Yeah.
You're still all here.
Thank you very much. Okay, so, motion to adjourn, Christine DeStazio,
Yes.
Carleen Sharmalis,
Yes.
Singh Khalsa,
Yes.
Trisha Staley,
Yes.
Heather Romansky,
Yes.
Mark Betancourt,
Yes, and have a nice night, everyone.
Stacy Gould,
Yes, and have a great trip, Heather.
Thank you.
and the chair, Joe Lucia, votes yes. We stand adjourned. It is 8:09 p.m. Everybody, thank you very much for your contributions tonight, and we see you all soon.
Take care. Okay.
Good night.
Stop recording.